when I've had back-to-back community board, co-op board, and Morris Jamel board meetings, and I would never have been able to make them in person, but virtually I can make them.
I'm trying to read some of the names.
Yeah, I'm going to step away for a second. I will be back.
Oh, good. We can talk behind Wayne's back. Hello, everyone.
Hi, sir. How are you?
Fine. How are you? You
Hi.
are Ramona. You are Ramona. I can see with tiny little writing.
Yes, I am. I thought that it has the name of the Dominican Studies Institute because I'm using a computer that belongs to the college, and sometimes I come with different names. And
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But apparently, you are you at the moment.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
And I see someone who has the same first name that I have. Mr. Burke.
Hi, James. My name is James, of course, and I work with Councilmember Carmen De La Rosa. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I read that as well. Yeah. I went to our public schools and actually learned how to read real well. So, yeah, I'm one of their success stories. How is Vivian?
Yeah, 1 second.
Vivian has to unmute. There you go.
I'm 3 minutes late and there's a whole gang here.
Yeah, I was late also, and Wayne stepped away for a moment. So
We don't get to see his background.
well, when his face comes back, the real Wayne comes back, and I see you have your background blurred.
Yeah, I don't know. I did that a long time ago. It doesn't have to be. It's the usual books.
Yeah.
If you'd like me to unblur, I can unblur.
Some people like it. Some, it's your background. I mean, obviously, if you had dead bodies there, that'd be another story.
They're kind of below the couch.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Good. Very wise. Very wise.
Hi,
now
Dr. Hernandez.
we get to see our council person.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hi.
And see, Wayne is back.
Yes, Wayne is back.
So
Is
we have
that
to
a
stop
movie?
talking about you.
Good evening, all. What did you say?
Is
We
that a
have to stop
movie?
talking
Wayne is
about it.
back?
Yes, it's a new movie, and it's on HBO Max, but also in theaters.
And the background for the opening shot?
That's the Alhambra.
Oh,
That's one of the few places I actually want to go.
Well, it is 7:05.
Wayne,
Yes.
there's a Mr. Moretti, and because I'm not a host, I'm just assistant chair. But anyway, so I can't do anything for this man.
I don't see
But
him.
he said that he knows. He was asking for Dr. Hernandez and saying he can't turn on his camera. I don't know if he's supposed to be with her, presenting or something.
Waldemar.
Yes. Well, he's stuck without a camera.
I don't see him logged in.
He's in the attendees. He's not in the panelists. So he needs to be, first of all, brought over.
No, I don't see him is what I'm saying. I'm in the attendees.
Oh.
Can you see Mariela?
Yeah, he's there. He's at the end. He's
okay. So hang on. Let me see.
Ramona, can you please let me know the people that you need to be with you? I have one.
Waldemar Moretti and Mariela Pichardo. They both are researchers at the Dominican Studies Institute, and they have worked on this program. Actually, I asked then that many of you haven't seen the map. I thought that you have seen the map, and we decided, there he is, that's Waldemar. And then Mariela, there's Mariela.
Okay.
So they both researchers they're very young, but they both researchers at the Dominican Studies Institute and have worked on this project. If you can give access to Mariela to share the screen because you haven't seen the map.
Yeah, so we haven't yet started the meeting, so let me call it to order and get things moving, which is what I was about to do. So it's now 7:07. And we've got a quorum of the Land Use Committee. So I'd like to call the March 2022 meeting to order. My name is Wayne Benjamin, and I chair Land Use for Community Board 12 Manhattan. I would like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves, starting with Vivian.
I'm Vivian Ducat. I'm the public member. I live across the street from Wayne Benjamin, and I think I've been on this committee about 15 years.
Jim.
I'm Jim Berlin. I'm a member of this committee and the Traffic and Transportation Committee, and I've been on this committee longer.
Yes. I will not say since the beginning of time, but just a long time. Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya, a board member, assistant chair of Land Use Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also see that we have a board member who's not a committee member, but we're happy to have Sally. So Sally, why don't you introduce yourself? You're muted, Sally.
Oops. Sally Fisher, resident of Inwood, member of Community Board 12 since 2017, and currently the treasurer of the board.
Thanks for joining us, Sally. So
Thank you.
We have 3 agenda items, and I would say we're all really pleased to have our council rep, Carmen De La Rosa, joining us. We also are working on having our council rep, Sean Abreu, join us. And I know that I reached out to your office, Carmen, to say that the Land Use Committee would like to have the opportunity to speak with you about some of our, planning, zoning priorities, but I'm sure we also are interested in hearing from you, what are your priorities in those areas in affordable housing and all. So with that, of course, warm welcome. The floor is yours for any initial comments you want to make. I did share with your office a few documents that a neighbor of mine asked for, because they are actually scheduling a meeting with Sean Abreu to talk about some of the development issues that the community board has talked about for the last year and a half in this southern end of the district. So once again, welcome. So glad you could join us.
Great, and I have the documents here. I was reading them before the meeting. Thank you so much, Chair Benjamin, and to the entire committee for having me tonight. It's wonderful to see La Doctora Ramona Hernandez, who's a personal shero of ours. It's a pleasure to see you, Doctora. And it's an honor to be here. I am your new council member, your old assembly member, but I am 2 months into the new position and excited about everything that we have planned and in store for our community. Obviously, land use is one of the main powers of the council. And as our community already knows, there are a lot of good things that can come from the land use process, but also a lot of harmful things that can come out of the land use process. I am also appointed, I did not get appointed to the General Land Use Committee, but I was appointed to the Landmarks Preservation and Public Siting Subcommittee, which is an important committee because I think landmarks is one of the tools we have in our toolbox for actually preserving structures, buildings in our communities, landmarks that we deem important for our community. So I'm looking forward to the work of that committee and making sure that we have access to those preservation tools right here in our community. So as far as land use goes, just to give you a little bit of what my vision is, right? I think that the big elephant in every room is always the Inwood rezoning and what comes next. Obviously, the Inwood rezoning has been voted on, litigated, relitigated, and stands, as you all know. I see my role as the council member to be a main watchdog for the promises, for the commitments that have been made to our community through the Inwood rezoning, as someone to hold the mayoral agencies accountable for making sure that the voices of our community are represented when it comes to the tenements of the rezoning. There's many commitments. There's lists full of things that are supposed to be coming into our community. And as you all know, most of it is a memorandum of agreement with our community. So we're gonna need our community to be organized, empowered, and informed in order to make sure that we are following up on all of the things that are coming in. And as projects begin to happen in our community, where are the areas and the opportunities for us as a community to chime in, to give feedback, to claw back, to change, if any, to hold developers who are trying to come into our communities accountable, to make sure that the infrastructure needs of our community are at the forefront. For example, when you're building a new building, what do the roads look like? What does the transportation system look like? What does our environmental infrastructure look like? What do our school infrastructure look like near those projects? Most of it is happening on 10th Avenue, as you all know, and there is a lot going on there right now. And so we have been spending, James, who's on, my chief of staff who's on the call, is the point person for land use in my office. We've spent a significant amount of time these last 2 months getting up to date with the agencies, with the mayor's office about the Inwood rezoning and the projects and opportunities that are there, the investments that came in. And so I assume that this will be something that we will continue to do in the next few weeks as we gear up for construction to happen in our community. And as construction starts, we're also going to be seeing quality of life impacted. And we want to be a voice and advocate for our community to make sure that we are not being disrupted in significant ways. And so that is sort of where I am as far as the Inwood rezoning. There are also other developments that fall outside of the Inwood rezoning happening throughout the district. There was a proposal that I began to read regarding a possible historic district in Park Terrace that was brought to my attention. There is also development that is happening as of right throughout the district that we also have to be just as mindful and watchful of. There are a number of variances before the Board of Standard and Appeals, who also the committee that I sit on has some oversight over. And so I've been trying to keep ahead of all of those variances, talking to community members, making sure that I'm testifying before city planning if there are things that are that the community does not agree with in the variance. And so we are trying our best to sort of capture all of the development that is happening here and reduce the harms. I think one of the things that is interesting that we're just beginning to take on is this idea of co-governance and how we govern with the community, with the board. This is part of the reason why I'm here. I see Community Board 12 as an ally and a partner in this work. We're also in my office beginning smaller committees that we are putting out to the community to apply or be part of if they'd like to, where they can advise us, where they can give feedback and bring to our attention policies, reforms, and other things that they'd like to see happening as far as land use is concerned. And so I'm excited about that. We just put that out on our social media and are going to be talking about that a lot. We hope that some of the members will apply and that we will work hand in hand with this committee and Community Board 12 in that endeavor. And one other point that I'll just bring up that I think is super important when we're talking about land use and development overall is our open spaces, our waterfronts, our parks, and the way that those spaces interact with the land use process. There are some very significant investments that were promised to our community through the Inwood rezoning as well, along the Harlem River Esplanade and others, the North Cove, that I think we have a responsibility to protect. we have a responsibility to preserve. And I will be putting significant effort into that process. So that's sort of where I'm at. I'm going to leave it there and open up back to the chair for questions or anything else that you may need.
Thank you so much. I don't want to hog the conversation, although I have at least 3 quick follow-ups that I want to put on the floor, but also have ample opportunity for my committee members to also speak with you. Regarding the Inwood rezoning, one of the things that I recall, and I've mentioned on several occasions, the genesis of it was an interest of then Councilman Rodriguez to look at the area east of 10th Avenue and to have rezoning that was focused on sort of economic development incentives. And as you know, EDC, which is strange because city planning didn't lead that initiative, EDC did. As they began to discuss it with the community, there was a lot of concern of, you know, whether certain buildings near parts of Park Terrace would be too tall. And somewhere along the line, the discussion of sort of economic development was lost.
Yes.
And what was finally, you know, adopted is, you know, taller or shorter, you know, buildings and preservation. But I don't see anything in the zoning that speaks to economic development. And, you know, so the question is, what can, you know, we do to sort of diversify the sort of the land use mix uptown so that we have a more diverse economic base? I mean, Presbyterian is a major employer, but once you get beyond, you know, Presbyterian, I mean, we have lots of, you know, stores, bars, and restaurants. But I thought the idea, I know Udonis was interested in technology and whether that's a good fit or not. So that was one question. You know, the other question is, and you mentioned infrastructure, and that is so critical. This community board had an infrastructure task force years ago that never really got off the ground. One of my concerns is with the action the city council took, I guess, late last year, the beginning of this year, to disallow gas connections. There was a lot of applause of that, but I remember when under the Bloomberg administration, we had to shift away from number 6 oil and then from number 4 oil, and the move was for gas. So my building, and I was president of the co-op board at that time and still am, which is probably why I'm getting gray hair. In order to upgrade to gas, the infrastructure that Con Ed has for gas in the area was insufficient. We had to pay $250,000 for them to upgrade the lines in the street. And it's $250,000 as opposed to almost double that because we agreed to be on interruptible gas. So if the demand gets too high, they can tell us to switch to oil. There was a nursing home in Central Harlem that got a proposal for $600,000 for Con Ed to bring a line for 3 blocks. I think there was a recent article for a building in Inwood where they got I think a $3 million bill. So that's with gas, and Con Ed's been working on updating the infrastructure for 15 years. Their electrical grid is equally as inadequate. So as we start putting more buildings on electrical, what is the game plan for the city council and the mayor to work with Con Ed? Because the current grid is not going to take it, and we can't just applaud that we're being green because we're going to be green and in blackouts.
Yes.
And then the you know, third thing is your point about development that is outside of the Inwood rezoning. And, you know, Community Board 12 is a big area geographically, and the documents that I forward to you speak to work that the Community Board has focused on recently, but also going back, you know, 15 years, that looks at, you know, contextual zoning, that looks at, as you mentioned, historic preservation as one of the means to preserve neighborhood character, and, you know, resolutions and planning studies that have been shared with city planning and landmarks that they really have not acted on. And, you know, sometimes you might get the sense, or city agencies might get the sense that community boards are crying wolf, but in the area just north of 158th Street, 158th Street, we now have a proposal for a 17-story building, another proposal for a 13-story building, because the existing zoning, which is R8, allows for much denser development than what is there now. And that's something that we pointed out, a decade ago.
Yeah.
So the question then is, what can you as our, advocate do to get both the city agencies and the mayor's office, to listen? Because I don't think the proposals that CB12 passed said we are against development. We're saying we want development that makes sense given the existing built form.
Correct. Yes, well, thank you for those questions. I'll start with the economic development piece. I like to say that I think when I think back on the rezoning process and how it began in a good way, in that it was meant to be planning that was driven by the community, right? I will give that one olive branch to the rezoning process. It was meant to be development that came from the community to the mayor, right? Somewhere along the way, I believe that intentionality was misconstrued, and it became, what are the pet projects that we can bring in order to get these towers built in Inwood? And so I think that while the intention of community-based planning is something that I agree with, the process of community-based planning must inherently come from the community. And that piece of it was lacking. I recognize that. I think that that's why the economic development piece ended up falling off the table. I think that in the previous council member's vision for economic development, as you mentioned, there were things like training spaces and certification programs for workforce. There were things like a STEM center and a STEM initiative. The Inwood Library development, for example, is going to have a New York City first STEM center in that development. There were things like deploying algebra for all in Inwood and increasing the academic attainment of technology and STEM in an effort to have long-term economic development. I think the previous council member saw it more as a hub for technology and future workforce than actually empowering the different economic engines that exist in Inwood right now. That part of Inwood was more manufacturing level buildings. I think that there is a need to have more. For example, I met with a young entrepreneur in our community who has a craft beer, and he's looking for space for a brewery. And he wants to do that type of work in the community, but within the rezoning, there isn't an adequate space any longer. Those spaces will not continue to be that. There'll be more residential spaces. So there needed to be a broader conversation around what are the economic development goals of the community. And science could have been a good major part of it, but it shouldn't have been all of it, right? You mentioned the hospital. The hospital is our largest employer in the district. I think having more training capacity to make sure that our workforce was building a pipeline to employment in every sector of healthcare is important. And I don't think that those things happened within that planning process. That being said, I'm always an optimist, and I think that there are spaces for us to intervene and opportunities for us to bring programs and economic development opportunities with what we have, right? And I think that that's the part where I'm interested in hearing the thoughts of the committee, the thoughts of the community as to what type of economic development we want to see in our community. Where are the gaps? Where are the industry gaps that we see that we think our community could benefit from? As far as the gas hookups, I actually remember the conversion from the 6 oil to 4 oil. It was one of like the first projects I remember reading on when I started my work in government in 2007. And I remember how burdensome and it was one of Bloomberg's pet projects, right? And it was all in the name of greening our city, making it more sustainable. But now we're in the situation where all of these investments that have been made are now obsolete, right? And I think that one of the things you should know, the law that you were referring to is Local Law 97. And it's a good law in itself, because what it basically says is that we're shifting our focus in the way that we use energy and gas. And so, but I do know that bill does have a clause in it that says that there is supposed to be a study done of the economic hardships that may come with Local Law 97, and that there needs to be remedies put in place for middle income, low income buildings, for example, building owners who will have to convert. I think that's part of the conversation that has not happened in the public eye, that I believe needs to happen in earnest. James and I have just been talking about this issue the last few days, because we have been seeing the stories about our neighbors who are now getting these $3 million bills, and how heartbreaking it is to not have a remedy in place already. And so I think that the points of intervention for us in this process will be making sure that this administration does have those conversations, is educating our community, is building, right? We're going into a budget process, building a fund or a mechanism to provide relief for buildings like yours who have already made this investment and do want to do the right thing for the environment, however, cannot burden your tenants, your owners with a bill that is honestly untenable at this point. And so I'm open to that conversation. I'll talk to you more offline about it, since you live in one of these buildings, and I will be looking forward to having that conversation in the council as well. And I know that it's something that we're going to be talking about, and those conversations have already started. As far as development outside of the Inwood rezoning, I agree with everything you said as far as making sure that we are using the tools at our disposal, not only to build up, but zoning goes the other way also. We can downzone in our community. We can say this area, the zoning here will yield a building or a development that is far exceeds the character of our community, and we can enter a process that does the opposite and de-zones on an area. And I think that those are conversations that we should be having. I read some of the information you sent about Riverside Drive, and I think it's an important conversation. I welcome sitting both with Sean and the board once again. If you'd like me to sit in on that meeting with Councilmember Abreu, I'm happy to do that, to see how we can work together as council members and within the committee structures to deal with some of these issues. And as far as accountability for city planning, the Board of Standards and Appeals, and the role of the community board, I think all of that conversation is about political will, right? As your council member, I should be holding up the flag of the community board to say, my community board has spoken. I was proud that when we were having the conversation about the church on Cummings Street, both Senator Jackson and I were able to go together and testify before the Board of Standards and Appeal in opposition to that variance, and in accordance to what this committee had also put in a resolution. And so I think that that's a model we should continue to bring your voices into the processes that we are a part of behind closed doors, as they say, and bring light and bring your voices into that process. So I'm committed to that, and I'm looking forward to continuing those conversations in a case-by-case basis with the developments that are happening across the district.
Thank you. I see 3 hands. First Vivian, then Tanya, then Jim. So Vivian, you are first.
Good. Hi, Councilperson De La Rosa. I'm one of the directors of this group of people called Save Riverside, who were actually called the Upper Riverside residents. Anyway, I assume that you know something about it now in terms of the two buildings that Wayne mentioned. And one is a set of 12 houses that were built in anticipation of the subway coming, like the bigger houses that I live in, also across the street from Wayne. And the other is a building that belonged to somebody who was an operative in the Underground Railroad downtown and was chased out. I know that Landmarks, we've tried multiple times, doesn't care about traffic issues. However, I don't know if you know about this, that if they were to build on 158th Street, that's the exit and entrance to the West Side Highway, and an emergency route for various things. And I wonder to what extent you as a council person could work together with people who also deal with traffic to get rid of this ridiculous. I mean, I know you're not supposed to use it for landmarking purposes, but it's on its own is an untenable thing for the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm curious. And again, this is a little bit out of my jurisdiction, so I don't want to step on Councilmember Abreu's toes, but I will say that I think that something that could be effective in this type of situation is having maybe a meeting or a call with the FDNY, for example, and have them maybe issue a concern if they have one for the access, emergency access or egress, matters in that area. Also, the Department of Transportation, right? A lot of the time the agencies talk to each other, but a lot of times they don't. Maybe there are some interagency solutions that we could assist with. I'm happy to have this conversation with Councilmember Abreu and see if I can be helpful in any way. But I think sometimes when one agency, because city planning's mission and their goal are very narrow. And so they look at what they're in charge of, right? They're not looking at everything else around it. And so I think that having another agency say, hey, there's a flag here, that may be helpful in getting some movement. And so I'm happy to talk to Sean about this and see if we can work together on something.
Thank you.
Great. Tanya.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you, Councilmember De La Rosa, for being here to talk to us today. I just have a few questions for you, and then responding to your, asking us, appeal to ask us what we feel are some of the gaps in terms of economic development. But the first question I wanted to ask you was, you talked about empowering, it's very important for you that, in this new iteration, as we move forward with inward zoning, that the community is empowered. And I wanted to see how that looks for you. What does that look like? I know you talked about having some, small committees with community, but what is empowerment for you? And the reason I ask that question is because I can say in my 17 years in this community, I do feel that there's definitely a need for more empowerment and more of a voice. But there's also another layer to it. It's also, I feel there is a lack of empowering all of the community, that there is an emphasis on empowering certain segments of the community at the deficit of empowering everyone. And I think sometimes certain people in our community take it up, basically, form their own enclaves and just do their thing because, they don't feel included in that sort of vision, right, for this community, and I've heard that many times from the Jewish community and others. How do we do that? How, where is that as a part of this? And I think it's going to be very important.
Yeah.
Addition, and it's just it's unfortunate because we have so many people in our community, diverse people in our community who could really, who are contributing to the economic, health of the community, and who could do more, but the focus is just not on them at all. And I would like to see that change and not be so one-sided. Also, I think in terms of areas where, and I would just like your response to that in terms of what empowerment is going to, I want to know what that's going to look like. But also, I think one area that's lacking is economic empowering of women in this community. I think that there are, there's it's very male centered in a lot of ways in this community. And how can, I guess tying this into Women's History Month, which is this month, but in case people didn't know, but how do we do that? How do we, and I mean all women, I mean a diversity of women, all of the women that have businesses and are trying to start a business or may have ideas. How do we empower them?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very important. Also, maybe even younger people, how to get them sort of thinking about being entrepreneurs. And I don't want the conversation centered on marijuana, cannabis. I do think that that's important. And that's something that we need to think about. But I think there's so many other types of economic development that doesn't center around, controlled substances that, I think would be very helpful for us to look at. In what ways can we look at so many other types of businesses and so many types of other opportunities to, empower this community and economically. And so, those are some areas, but I would say perhaps your office could take a look at who isn't empowered, not just saying we need to empower, but I think knowledge is key. Like who isn't empowered in this community, who's not at this table in terms, and how can we make sure that happens? Maybe that study or a closer look at that, which might be open a Pandora's box up here. But how do we do that? Anyway, that's it.
So I'm going to try to capture everything you said. I mean, first of all, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to be looking. I'm always talking about the gaps, right? Where are the gaps? One of the tenements of the committees that I'm forming is to do deep canvassing. And deep canvassing means that when there's an issue that's coming up in our community, it's not just about putting it out on Twitter. It's about actually going to the ground and knocking on the doors of the people that are in that radius of where that project is happening or where that policy is coming in, or what are the areas in the community geographically that maybe aren't coming to the community board, right? That we have to go and go to where they are in order to empower them. That's what I mean by empowering the voices that are not at the table. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that we should be looking at that, right? And I'm constantly always trying, when I'm in a space or occupying a space, to look at who are the people that are not in this room that may need a seat at the table, right? So I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I share that concern. I think that, there are bigger conversations that need to happen in our community about inclusion. I want to be a partner in those conversations. I will say that they work both ways, right? Cliques have existed since we were all in high school. They have always existed, and I think they may always exist. But I think that we have to make an effort to break up some of that so that there aren't people that are specifically feeling excluded from government process. And that is my priority, to make sure that people are not feeling excluded. But it's also going to take us realizing the humanity in each one of us, right? That we're flawed as human beings, right? And some of it is a philosophical conversation that maybe this is not the best place to have, but it does have to do with that, because I know that me personally, I have felt rejection in some spaces, and then I don't want to go back to those spaces, right? And we all deal with those types of hard realities where in our communities, in different spaces. So how do we break that up so that we're creating spaces where people feel safe, where they can share, where they feel that they are at the table? I want to do that. I want to be able to be a bridge for our community in the different spaces where we congregate, where we meet, where we have, Zoom rooms. And I hope that I can work with you on some of that. And then as far as women's empowerment, I'm glad you brought that up. So I am the chair of the Civil Service and Labor Committee. One of the things that I actually did today was visit a center for non-traditional employment for women. And I actually used a saw that I've never used before, and a drill. I've used a drill before. And I was learning about the trades, right? And how women are not traditionally empowered in the trades. We're gonna hold our hearing in March that hopefully will center around women, all women, trans women, non-binary women, people who identify as women, on retention and recruitment of women in the trades, right? And I just put that as a small example of what the council in general and what I as a councilwoman can be doing in order to highlight and bring emphasis to the issues of inequality, to the issues of the empowerment of women. And so one of the things that I think is important for me to bring to the table as the chair of this committee is the apprenticeship opportunities that are lacking in our community, where there are no pipelines for apprenticeship programs for women at all here. I've never seen them. I know a few women that are carpenters in the community that were members of the board too. But other than that, there isn't actually a pipeline for those type of workforce opportunities. And so I'm excited to look at those issues. I'm really open to having a conversation with you about how else we can empower our women. And the same thing with young people, right? Young people, I consider myself young still, but young people have the answers to how they want to live their lives and what they want to do with their lives. They have self-determination. They can decide what industries they want to work in, what opportunities they want to see. We just got to listen to them. I do believe, though, that cannabis is sort of right now the wave of right now and the future, and it's no longer a controlled substance. But I hear you in that we should be looking at, like I mentioned earlier, the medical careers, right? Technology, the creative careers. The arts cannot be lost in any of this conversation, even when we're talking about preservation, when we're talking about development. Like, we cannot lose the arts, because that is part of our culture, of uptown culture. And I think that using those as tools to create actual career opportunities for our young people is important. So I look forward to maybe having a coffee with you offline and chatting more about what we can do together.
That's really sounds great. You mentioned
Thanks.
a former board and committee mate, Tammy Rivera, who was on the land use committee for a number of years, is very active with the Carpenters Union.
Yes, my dear friend.
And so that's really someone to work on. But it's more than just apprenticeships programs for women that are not there. In the skilled trades, there's a real issue with skilled people retiring. There's no pipeline, period, except for those that are kind of nepotistic with family. I mean, my nephew years ago, waited in line in Long Island City for one of those apprenticeships. People got there at like 4 and 5 in the morning. And in the space of like 5 minutes, all the applications were given out, and that was it. So on one hand, we hear a lot from the trades that, people are turning their nose at the skilled trades, and it's really a career opportunity. On the other hand, they're really not opening the doors to, the young people broadly defined, male and female, but particularly, the young people who are predominantly of color to get into those trades. So that's something really to look at.
Yes, I agree. That's something we could look at. The other thing that I failed to mention, one thing that I'm going to be focusing on a lot is also industries that have traditionally been led by women and immigrant women, women of color. For example, childcare, right? When we roll out policies like universal pre-K, I've been talking about this to anybody who will listen, we leave behind those home childcare providers, right? We leave them behind. When we look at the spectrum of care, even senior care, right? There's been a lot of cuts to senior care at home. And so when I think about the empowerment of women and workforce, we have to look at that and how our policies inadvertently, right, leave some of those industries that have traditionally employed women in our community, and now they're no longer functional. Even when you look at things like the taxi drivers in our community, the livery drivers, a lot of those people are women. And now with Uber and Lyft and everything else, they're no longer employed. So definitely something that's on my radar. And thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, Wayne, I just want to say, Councilmember De La Rosa, yeah, I interned at NEW when I was a graduate student at Columbia. So yeah, I'm really excited that you are working with them, because they're definitely great. So yeah, that's awesome. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you.
Jim?
Thank you again for being here, councilperson. I want to compliment you and my colleagues, because this is probably one of the more thoughtful conversations we've had and more philosophical conversations we've had in a while. So that is it's as it should be, of course, but sometimes we, scream at one another instead. So this is a very wonderful thing. Secondly, I too am a great fan of Tammy. She was just such a wonderful board member and so on. In fact, please give her the regards of our entire board. Now I'm going to go into the mundane. It turns out that, and I taught physics and computer science, and my father was an electrician, even more importantly. The way we're really going to get green is not through gas. It's got to be through electricity. That's the only clean way we have of moving energy around, which means the electrical infrastructure of probably most of the city is inadequate. And certainly in our area, it isn't what it should be. Now, the fact, that Con Edison to some degree has not been sitting on its hands. There is a whole new substation up in Inwood that brings significant amounts of additional power to our neighborhood. Whether it gets out into the neighborhood is another story, because that's what the distribution system is about. And that's where Con Edison always comes short. And you may or may not recall, many years ago, our neighborhood, Washington Heights and Inwood, and a corner of Riverdale had its own blackout for 2.5 days. It was just ridiculous. And part of it had to do with the fact that there just wasn't enough power. But part of it is they were managing the system so poorly that if the thing hadn't actually just turned itself off, they might have burnt the whole thing out. They were acting so stupidly. And there's a report on this. And I actually discussed this much to the horror with some people who came from Con Ed. So this thing, especially about the electrical infrastructure, which is going to be key, is something that we, and the other thing, and I'm not telling any secrets, we in Northern Manhattan could be in the Bronx. We could be in Outer Mongolia sometimes. They don't care about us. So I know you will be advocating for us. So that's one piece. Now, the other thing I wanted to comment is on this gas craziness. It turns out Con Ed pulled the same crap with the area where I live. They wanted millions of dollars to run a gas pipe up Cabrini Boulevard. And without that gas main, of course, the gas mains that are there now are good for cooking gas, but there's not enough gas for anything else much. So, and they wanted, some ridiculous amount of money. And that would have been, the apartment buildings south of us and north of us, and the complex to the east of us, Hudson View Gardens, they would have been fed, but they wanted us to pay for this. Now, at the time this happened, going to gas was not critical because there was no prohibition on what kind of oil you could use. So we just sat on our hands, and eventually, and I don't know how it happened, the same pipe that they wanted millions of dollars for, they just put in. Now, I don't want you to turn around and have Con Ed come to us and say, now we want our millions of dollars, because we're not going to, but you see the point. So they're basically very fickle. And the other thing I'm going to mention to you about, because I happen to be on the board at Castle Village, so we get to interact with these various entities. And there are two entities in particular. One of them I already spoke about. That's almost impossible to deal with, and that is Con Edison, because they're basically the only energy supplier, and they just do what they want. It's just like, the 800-pound gorilla. They just do what they want. And unfortunately, there's a city agency that's almost as notorious at being impossible. And if you're trying to do stuff with gas, they get involved also, and they make matters worse most of the time. And that's the Department of Buildings. They're just not user-friendly. I won't even get started. So in fact, what we're doing now at Castle Village, which is what other people want to do, is we are going to put in new boilers that will be, they'll be dual fuel, but we're going to burn gas, and we've got the gas pipes. But the craziness that has gone on between, Con Ed will say one thing, DOB will say another thing, and then Con Ed has subcontractors that can speak for Con Ed, who sometimes have a third opinion on things. So it's, and then the key, and this is another sort of catch-22, but it's worth understanding. When you grumble about things, they just roll their eyes and go, oh, but it's all about safety. And then you can't say anything. So they have this magic hocus pocus. But meanwhile, you know, they're being inconsistent and occasionally heavy-handed. And this is both of these entities. And they're making life difficult for probably
Everyone.
any landlord in the community that wants to do anything. You know, and Wayne, I'm sure, will tell us horror stories, and you know, other people can too. So I just wanted to alert everyone to these things, and you know, we're in a position, you know, we're sort of the mouth of the community, so we make noise sometimes, and sometimes we do that well. But you are in a much better position, and I know probably I'm not telling you anything new, but I think it all needed to be said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. And it's good noise. So thank you for sharing. I'll say that, you know, we've had our ups and downs with Con Edison here in the district. I remember the blackout. I was a young little girl, but I remember the blackout. And it was a scary time for us. And I think out of that experience came a promise to our community to be better neighbors. And they haven't been. Right? Social responsibility, corporate responsibility is something that we need to take on. I've been happy to see the Attorney General's office start to question now Con Ed, especially in the face of these rate hikes that are unexplainable, or they're just trying to pass the buck as to why people's bills went from $90 to $900 with no explanation. And so I'm optimistic that the right people are looking at this. The state has a lot of authority over the public utilities. So we need to continue these conversations with our state representatives now that I've taken that hat off. And I'm glad to do that. But you're right in that we need to make sure that these corporations are accountable to our communities. And, you know, monopolies don't work. And this is the prime example of why they don't work. And so I hear you wholeheartedly. And we'll continue to work on that issue for sure. I did see that Attorney General James did put out a letter to Con Edison asking for an explanation. I'll be curious to see what their response is, if any. And, you know, we'll take it from there, but I hear you.
Thank you. Sally. Sally, you're muted.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Carmen, and especially thank you for bringing James Burke back to our neighborhood. One of my concerns throughout the whole Inwood rezoning was the failure to consider environmental impacts. And I am assured with your commitments and with his expertise that we will address those things that we didn't, especially because Inwood is an environmental justice area, and that fact has never been considered throughout this whole process. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if it's appropriate to bring it up to you, to Wayne, or who, but Gail at one point had convened an Inwood rezoning task force. We had a few meetings, probably not as many as we should have. And now she's gone. So I wonder if that's something that you, working with Mark, working with the community board, could sort of restart. Because I think we do need to do a much better job than I think we're doing on tracking commitments, things that have fallen by the wayside, particularly on the environmental side.
Yeah.
But I guess that's sort of my plea to you. And, you know, we really look forward to even studying some of the environmental impacts that were ignored by the city when things were proposed. I think there are things that legitimately should not go forward, and we can make a case for that. And then I just wanted to bring up one thing that was in the Q&A about what's going on at 22 Cumming Street. Someone had asked a question, and just to answer that question, and also to alert your office, Carmen, to this going on, the 22 Cumming site is returning to Board of Standards and Appeals for another hearing on March 28th. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping, you know, we really appreciated you being there and speaking for the community, and I'm hoping that you will make a return visit.
Yes, I will make a return visit. And, you know, just on the basis that if we had a rezoning, and this was one of the items that the community actually got that they liked from the rezoning, they should not be asking for a variance to circumvent that. So just based on that principle, I will be back on the 28th to say those things to the board. As far as the task force, we've been talking about the task force. There's also a task force, I believe, that involves mayor appointments, the EDC and other people that is more, that should be revived. We're looking at how to do that. We're going to be having conversations with the board president as well on that. And as far as the environmental impacts, there is legislation that, was written in the previous council that I'm sure iterations of it will be reintroduced. We're looking at our legislative priorities and seeing if we're able to carry some of those bills. I agree with you that the environmental review was inadequate and did not take into account many of the longstanding environmental impacts of construction in our community for the foreseeable future. Also, many of you all who are on this call also brought up the racial impacts, which is something that the public advocate, Jumani Williams, is also championing on a citywide level. And I support wholeheartedly. So I'll be looking at those things. And thank you for recognizing. So James, who's my chief of staff, used to be an organizer for We Act for many, many years. And so he's bringing in his environmental expertise into our office. And so we look forward to working with you, Sally, on those issues.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Just for your reference, Sally, there is a sort of an inter-agency task force or whatever that is presented to land use 2 or 3 times on the inward rezoning commitments. But I think the last time they presented to us, we pointed out that many of the commitments speak to areas where other CB12 committees are, focused and have jurisdiction, and that they should meet with more than just the land use committee. What's interesting though, Carmen, also about the environmental impacts, that issue was raised in the context of the inward rezoning, and the court said, forget it. And part of it is because whether it's the environmental impacts or zoning or Board of Standards and Appeals, what we sometimes fail to realize is that it's based upon how the laws are written and how the regulations that govern how those laws are implemented are written. And it was suggested in our committee several years ago that we needed to take a look at the CEQA, because if you follow what CEQA requires, it does not capture certain things. So it's not that the environmental review is inadequate or leaving something out because of any nefarious reasons. It's they're following what's required by the law, and the law doesn't require X. I've been involved in some EIS, and depending on who your consultants are, they might say the law requires this, but in reality, let's broaden it, because in reality, what the law requires is too narrow. But if you simply go by what this manual is telling you to look at, and you follow it, then you're doing the right thing per the regs.
Yeah, for sure. And I welcome that conversation as well. Wayne, if there are opportunities for us to legislate around the findings of the committee, please let us know. We're happy to put in legislation. We're happy to sign on to other legislation that exists that you all think will further that.
Right. I don't see any more hands. Are there anything else for Council Member De La Rosa? If not, I won't let you go yet. We did have another item on the agenda. I'm just going to introduce it and not talk about it much because I want to give Dr. Hernandez's team time to talk about it, but I think it dovetails nicely to what we're talking about. Last year, City Planning came to all the community boards with the Fresh 2 program. You'll be familiar with that, and we passed a resolution supporting that. And the objectives of that was basically to expand the boundaries of the program and to prevent saturation of supermarkets within, the fresh boundary, and have certain modifications, to how the stores look. And that all made sense. What we found out, however, with another matter we dealt with at the same time of Cummings, and this was, I think, 4650 Broadway, where there was a new development that included a fresh supermarket, And we were not against the supermarket per se, but the development was on a fairly large site. And so it allowed for a development project that was rather big, and it was across the street from a historic park and the cloisters. And so for that reason, we said, you know, use of the fresh program is really just allowing them to get the zoning bonus. Because if you look in the area, it's not a supermarket desert. There are supermarkets, you know, within a reasonable distance. And we might want to take a closer look at how many of them have fresh fruits and vegetables. But the real critical reason why the developer was using the fresh program was to get the zoning bonus, because the square footage that's allocated to the supermarket, you can add back to the residential part of the building. So I think in this case, it added 22 more units. And the chair of city planning, which is responsible for approving, because it's a certification, approved the application anyway. And it was explained to us last month by city planning staff that if the application, you know, satisfies certain program criteria, then the chair really doesn't have any choice but to approve it. And so one of my suggestions for the committee to look at, and you know, maybe the council as well, is to either modify the, you know, the new provision where they're looking at preventing the saturation of markets built using the program, or to add another criteria where there is a needs test that's added, you know, when we have an application, to look at the availability of supermarkets that provide fresh fruits and vegetables within the same, you know, half-mile radius, which is what they use to look at the saturation. And if they're, and they use 40,000 square feet for whatever reason, so I don't know what the threshold we should use, but I think that's something we need to look at. Because once again, if the chair of city planning is simply doing, you know, his or her job based upon what the regs say, we need to make sure the regs take into account not just the oversaturation of supermarkets that are built using the program, but the availability of supermarkets that serve the purpose of the program within the target area. And so for my committee members, this is something I think we can discuss in more depth and detail at our next meeting. I guess give everyone the opportunity to look at the resolution that we passed and the board adopted last year, as well as some of the materials, and think about how we might want to, you know, craft and ask that, you know, speaks to a needs analysis. Your thoughts on that, committee members? Who are all muted?
I think it's really important because the fact that that passed is a travesty. So I think it needs to be looked at much more carefully.
Tanya, Vivian, Jim?
It's certainly worth discussing. And like you said, not tonight. Because if you twist it around what the opponents to what we might want to do, this means test, you know, they're going to go, you mean you're opposed to having fresh fruit and vegetables at supermarkets? You know, so we do have to discuss it. But I mean, certainly the way it was used in our previous instance that just occurred, that did not help anybody. And you know, the council person and everyone here on this call is aware of the magnificence of Fort Tryon Park. And it's now going to have this eyesore standing right next to it. So when you're up at the flagpole, you know, looking out, you're just going to see this giant building that didn't used to be there. And you know, probably, so it, you know, that's, I agree, we should talk about it. Thank you.
All right, it will definitely be on the agenda for April. And I guess in the interim, I urge everyone to take a look at the materials that I circulated for reference, which includes the resolution that we adopted, and see how, to some extent, we're saying we passed this resolution, and you know, now we're telling our fellow board members we think we should modify it to add, you know, another test to the program.
Yeah. By the way, we did write a letter in opposition of that bonus. I can share the letter if that's helpful.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And so with that, I thank you for joining us. I see Steve Simon has also joined us. Steve, as you know, is a land use committee member as well. So I would now like to turn the floor over to Dr. Ramona Hernandez of the Dominican Studies Institute and her team. And as I mentioned on a couple of occasions, Dr. Hernandez actually presented to land use in October of 2020. So in one of our COVID years, but it was the first time the proposal for, I think it was called a Dominican Heritage District, a cultural district, was presented to us. And there've been lots of discussions subsequent to that. And I thought it would be useful for the team to come back to land use and give us an update on how that proposal currently stands. And we discussed, I think a month or two ago, a proposal from a community-based organization called While We Are Still Here, which focused on some historic plaques related to people associated with the Harlem Renaissance. And we all thought that was an interesting model to also use for your initiative, because first of all, it puts in the, sort of in the public, streets, information on, why a building or why a place is important. And even in our committee meeting discussion, there are folks saying, I didn't know that person, who wrote this or did that actually lived in our community. With that, Dr. Hernandez, the floor is yours. You can reintroduce your team and walk us through. I think someone on your team does have the ability to share the screen. I think Ebenezer said they did that. Okay, so great.
Thank you for the invitation. And since you have seen, the only thing that we can share is that map that you have already seen, and we have not added any other item to the map. Correct me, Mariela and Waldemar, if I'm wrong, in terms of any additional icon to the map. That map that I showed the last time that I was here, it's one component, and I would say it's sort of like the most visible component of the application for the historic Dominican district, proposed historic Dominican district. And I, when I accepted your invitation to come, the understanding was that I was going to give you an update of where we are at with this application, and also to consider what Wayne suggested to us. So I have some notes that I wanted to read to you, and I'm going to forget about showing the map once again, which you hopefully know very well. For now, let me talk to you about the status of the application. The draft of the application still remains on the review by the New York State Historic Preservation Office. And this is the potential outcomes of this review that they are conducting. It has been there actually for several months now. The Preservation Office will determine next steps, which can be any of the following. Revising or revisiting the application based on their expert comments, reject the application due to ineligibility, or approve the application and proceed to the next steps. If that is what happens, and this is the outcome that we are expecting, that is approved for us to continue to the next step, I'm going to tell you now, discuss with you what are the next steps. The next steps are submit a list of building owners to the New York State Historic Preservation Office. Notify building owners and elected officials about the initiative. And this is important because in some of the meetings that we have attended, people have complained that they haven't seen a kind of notification, official notification from us. And the reason for that is because we cannot do this until we receive this approval. Conduct a community outreach event with members of the New York State Historic Preservation Office. Present to better inform the public, and this will be honors in the community, residents, and other stakeholders, and present to them the initiative and then address any potential concerns that they might have. We also need to do with the New York Historic Preservation Office schedule meetings with the State Review Board, and directly presents the application to them as well. And then with the State Review Board, we'll proceed to approve or deny the application. That's another stage there that we need to pass. If the nomination is approved by the State Review Board and signed by the State Historic Preservation Officer, owners and elected official will receive a letter notifying them that it has been listed on the state register. If the nomination is approved by the National Park Service, another letter will then be sent informing owners and officials, elected officials, that the district has been listed on the National Register. If the proposal is approved, a National Register representative will prepare the nomination for final submission to the State Historic Preservation Officer, who is also the Commissioner of the State of New York Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. The Commissioner confers the State Register status and places the property in nomination to the National Register. The nominations are then sent to the National Park Service for final review and listing on the National Register. A question that comes usually is why a historic district? Why do we want to create a Dominican historic district? We were inspired by the Chinatown and Little Italy, who in 2009 achieved the designation of a joint historic district, recognized within the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. Their goal was to primarily two goals here, primarily. To honor and recognize the contributions of the Chinese and Italians who settled in these neighborhoods, and to attract attention to the area and stimulate tourism and cultural interest. While the mark these two communities had made in New York City so profoundly that you now, even without the designation, we might have known about them, the honor of being named a historic district brings an array of benefits. And these are the benefits with this nomination, actually the nomination. Propel positive image of the community, foster community and cultural pride, stimulate local economy. And I heard the concern about economic development as the councilwoman was speaking before. Encourage tourism, and also potential eligibility for federal grants and tax incentives. This is a huge concern in a huge attraction, I would say. We anticipate some concerns, that some building owners may object to this designation because they believe that it will impact their ability to do what they please with their property. That's something that we had heard, that if it becomes designated a historic place, people who own buildings in this particular site will not be able to change this building, and that is not the case. They will continue to have the ability to change, the properties that they own. And that's something that I have to be very, very clear about that. See, The other question that came to us is, why not just join the Harlem Heritage Marker project or a similar initiative? There are other initiatives to recognize Washington Heights, I have to tell you. And this is Wen was kind enough to chair the Harlem Heritage Marker project with us, which physically marks important locations and sites within the neighborhood where notable events for the African American community and others had taken place. We recently joined a similar project late this year. We were approached by the Jumel Morris Mansion to take part in something that is called Living Landscape Mapping Community Stories within Upper Manhattan History, which aims to document and exalt the contributions of various groups living in the Sugar Hill, Harlem, and Washington Heights neighborhood just around the Jumel Morris Mansion. Others who are part of the project include the Lenape Center and Black Garden Experience. This project will, as far as we have discussed so far, live online and discuss a collection of digital essays that and resources on the museum's new website. Let's see. We would like to proceed with having the proposed Dominican Historic District considered, because it is an opportunity for us to recognize the first major Dominican settlement in the U.S. and the state at the state and then also at the national level. Washington Heights is where Dominicans have been moving in considerable numbers since the days of Ellis Island. And that's one of the things that you are going to see in the map that is there forever. Something that people didn't know, and it's not part of the imagination of people in the US that you have Dominicans coming through Ellis Island. When we think of Ellis Island, we think of the millions of Europeans that came through that port and settled in New York City and also other parts of the country. And hundreds of books have been written about that. But little did we know that over 5,000 Dominicans, and this is an enormous number because of the size of the Dominican population at the time. Over 5,000 Dominicans came through that port, and many settled specifically in Washington Heights and marked that area. And you can ask a child who went to the public school system in either in Washington Heights or outside Washington Heights, and then we'll be able to tell you anything about that. So let's see. Another question that also have been raised when we talk about creating this Dominican Historic District, it's what happened to the rest of the people that live there. And one of the things that we wanted to share with you tonight is that we had learned as we conducted research in the area, that there are 73 resources, national resources that had national nomination. And Mariela, can you list them that are contained within the space that we are hoping to designate as a Dominican Historic District? There are 73 resources already there, and none of them will lose their character or their identity. So can you do me a favor, Mariela, and list those resources that we already have there, landmarks and national historic places?
Yeah, of course. Also, please bear with me if I disconnect. listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And for us, within the proposal that we have sent to the New York State Historic Preservation Office, they are considered non-contributing resources, meaning that they haven't been marked by us as having a specific Dominican essence or having importance or particular importance to the Dominican people, but we thought it was important to mention them as important parts of the district.
What are some of those resources?
I think that can you read it, Mariela, or you?
Well, not all 73, but what are some?
It's very simple. Waldemar, because it seems to be that Mariela have problems.
Oh, yes. So I can name a few of them. One of them, for example, under the National Register of Historic Places, the Moro Jumo Mansion is an example. That is considered a landmark under the National Register. That is also within our proposed Dominican historic.
Let me help you, Waldemar. I have this in my head. I don't have the list because I'm at home, but there are 2 historic districts within this site that we are asking. One is the Audubon Historic District, and another one is the Maurice Human Historic District. Those are 2 historic districts. And then within that confinement, there's 3 landmarks that we have. And you can mention the 3 landmarks. I don't remember all of them. One is the Hispanic Society. The other one is the Paul Complex, Robinson Complex, and I'm missing another one. There are 3 landmarks.
The third one is the Maurice Jumo Mansion.
Right. So 3 landmarks, 2 historic districts, and then there are, I think, 9 historic places. Mariela, can you read the 9 historic places that we have within this confinement, this place? I don't remember all of them, and I don't have a list with me, but there are 9 already there. And it is important that you know when you have a historic district, you have a number of buildings that are named specifically like that. For instance, the Audubon Historic District will have 9 buildings that are part of this. The Maurice Human Historic District has 55 buildings that are part of that district, and they are untouchable. You cannot change the identity. They are already what they are. So do you have that list, Mariela, of the 9 sites, historic sites within what we are proposing?
Is there any way we could see a map? Because it's sort of hard to envision what you're talking about without knowing what the map is.
Okay, we can show you the map that we have created for the Dominican Historic District. Mariela, do you have access? But we were trying to tell you that within that map, can you share the map, Mariela, please?
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
So Ebenezer, can you enable Mariela or Waldemar or someone to be able to share their screen?
Yes, we're going to share this screen. I made Ramona co-host. Who will share it? Mariela?
Mariela.
Okay, I will make you co-host in a second. Hold on.
Let me see if I have that list.
Okay, you are a co-host now. You can do it.
Okay, so what you see with the black thick line is the Dominican Historic District that we are proposing, right? And within that goes from 155th to 200 from south to north. And then from the Harlem River and the east to the west, Riverside. And then there's a funny curve of 169 it goes back to Broadway. Rather than Riverside, continue Riverside, it goes into Broadway. And the question that you might ask is, why this funny shape? It's because the district is based upon the understanding that within those blocks that you have there, you have so many Dominican markers, so many Dominican markers. You have more Dominican markers there than in any other place in the world, with the exception of the Dominican Republic. No other place. In fact, it will be hard to find another set of blocks like this that has so much visibility for a group of people. It's sort of like every corner that you walk in, Dominican has marked that place with something. That something will be something that carries the Dominican name somehow, whether it's the name of a town, whether it's the name of a Dominican person, or whether it's something that has been physically created by a Dominican person. That is what you have represented there. Now, the concern is that within that demarcation that you see, there are 73 resources that have already acquired national visibility, national nomination. 73. Among those 73, you have 2 historic districts, right? And that will be the Audubon Historic District, and that will be the Jumel Historic District.
Actually, we have three historic districts.
Which one is the other one?
There are 2 Audubons.
You have the Audubon Terrace Historic District, the Audubon Park Historic District, which are next to each other, and the other one is the Jumel Terrace Historic District.
If I may, the Audubon Park is a historic district on the local state level for the landmark for the city landmark organization under the National Register of Historic Places. That is Audubon Terrace is a historic district, but not Audubon Park.
Exactly. But there are different layers, sir. And if we don't find it in the National Registry, we cannot. In our case, right, we are an institute of research, and we have to go by what's unfortunately what is in writing there, not necessarily in the memory of.
Well, no, I think what Steve is saying is accurate, but I also understand that what you're saying, that there are city landmarks and then there are National Register. Your application is for a National Register designation, which basically goes through SHPO.
Exactly, and we have
and Audubon Terrace happens to be both.
Exactly.
And Audubon Park is currently landmarks, and there is an application pending for it to be SHPO. It's eligible, it is not yet designated.
Okay, and the same thing happened with the Hispanic Society, that is a landmark, right? But at the same time, it's part of a historic district, right? Yes, definitely, no question. So the interesting thing about this is that you have all of these resources already contained in here. And what we are saying is that, by designating this area that we have demarcated here, a Dominican historic district, it's not taken away from them, but it's on the contrary, it's adding, right? And that doesn't preclude other markers and other people to come and so find a space within this space to even create other historic district within this historic district. It's open. It is open. So we are hoping to get the support from Community Board 12, because this is only going to add to the kind of work and the kind of vision that Community Board 12 has regarding the neighborhood, right? The enhancement and the development and the preservation of what's good in this community. I don't know if I have anything else on my notes to add. Mariela, Waldemar, did I leave anything?
I will say, because Dr. Hernandez, you mentioned the other resources under the National Register within our proposed Dominican Historic District. I have the list. I can name them.
Okay.
Yes. So those resources are neither historic districts nor landmarks, and they are the Fort Washington Library, the North Presbyterian Church, the Fort Washington Armory, the 190th Street Subway Station, IND 8th Avenue line, the 181st Street Subway Station, RIT Broadway 7th Avenue line, the 168th Street Subway Station, RIT Broadway 7th Avenue line, and then the Fort Washington Presbyterian Church.
Okay, thank you. So all of this is within this limits that we have there. And when we were doing this, it's I think it's definitely this is going to add much more to a neighborhood at some point. Not anymore, because it has become very attractive to people who have funding and lots of money and high paying jobs, and now they coming here and they buying a property and paying high rents and so on. But there was a point in which Washington Heights was not known, was not attracted to people, but on the contrary, people were moving away from Washington Heights. And that you can see it when you look, for instance, of the census data, and you look 1950, 1960, and you see a decline of the population, or 1960 and 1970, and you see a decline specifically in the neighborhood. And then Dominicans came in mass number, and that began to change. So there is that history there that we are trying to preserve and memorialize for future generations.
I see a couple of hands, but before I get to them, I would ask some things that would be useful if you were to send to us, because capturing them from the verbal presentation might be difficult, is like the list of steps you have to go through. Yes. Would be very useful, because people often don't understand all of the steps you have to go through. The map, I don't know if you previously, I know you shared it with us. I don't know if you sent us, if you could send us the map, and also the list of the 73 resources, or clarify, I guess these are, SHPO recognized resources that are within there, so that we have that information.
We can do that. And we hope you have fun with this map. If you open the map, it's an interactive map. You will read a little bit of the information about anything that you can click on.
Yeah.
It's, we think that people will be, we can probably tell you the number of people who have already visited this in, the comments that they have sent. But we had heard some complaints. Why haven't they approached us with this? And the reason is that we simply cannot reach out to anyone in the community seeking support, because it's a process that is very specific, and we don't want to jeopardize this project simply because we are looking for support among the members of the community who I'm hoping will be very pleased with something that simply enhances the community as a whole.
Yeah, so I that sort of reinforces the reason why I asked for you to forward certain, information to us so that we have it. We are very familiar with people coming to the board, sharing their plans with us for proposed landmark districts. And there's really no prohibition against doing that. As a matter of fact, it's kind of encouraged, because at some point landmarks wants to know, are people in favor of that? And if SHPO's process is different, it's important for that to be documented. Just, two things I would point out. You mentioned early in your presentation that there have been some concerns expressed by property owners of how the SHPO designation would impact them. And the odd thing is landmark designation gives more protection than SHPO designation, but even in a SHPO district, any alteration still has to be reviewed and approved by SHPO. So it does add, and Jim was sharing with us earlier, the headache of dealing with the building department. It does add another level of approval to any physical change to a building within the district. And unlike landmarks, I think SHPO is concerned with the inside and the outside, whereas landmarks is only concerned with what you can see from the street. So that's something that you might want to, drill down further, and so that people understand how being in a SHPO district impacts changes and how they navigate, within that. And then I think just the history of the neighborhood, I would say the history of Washington Heights is probably no different than the history of like New York City with, post World War II, being quite frank, the white flight from cities. And so it wasn't people necessarily rejecting, Washington Heights. As a matter of fact, I live around the corner from where my Uncle Harold used to live. And, my godmother used to live up there on Fort George Avenue, and she could take the bus from East Harlem on 3rd Avenue and go straight up to her home. So there are a lot of folks who came from all over. My family came from the Caribbean, who, lived in Washington Heights and Harlem, whatever. But there were a lot of folks who, because of what was happening in urban environments at that time, started, to leave. So I think it's a broader citywide and national history. And Washington Heights is just part of that.
Yes.
But I think
Yes.
the first person I saw hand up was Tanya.
Yes, hi, Dr. Hernandez. I really appreciate your coming here to update this committee about what you're proposing. My first reaction, again, first of all, I want to say that I think it is important that people who have significantly transformed a particular community in the city and have contributed, on multiple levels to that community, that they are recognized, similar to what happened in Harlem and all of the contributions of Black people there in that community, in any other community, as you mentioned, in Chinatown and in Little Italy. Those things are important. But my reaction to, and my reaction to your map is that I have concern about the expansiveness of that area. You say it starts at 155. That does intersect with other areas, Harlem, Sugar Hill, those areas. And I am concerned about those areas being being, frankly, I feel that would be a little bit of erasure to have that. I think that perhaps it behoove you to think about amending that area. I feel, to not include that area. I, would not want to see an area that has a strong African-American history and historical contributions from many, many people who live there, who have, been there, to not to have that be a part of something to have that be overshadowed by that. So that's my first comment. And I really would hope that you would rethink. I don't know, I'm not sure who you might have spoken to before you put the map together, but I think that there is a need for more community conversation there, because what you're proposing is out, even parts that are outside of our particular district. Well, not outside of our district, but means something to people who are outside of our district, is what I'm trying to say. And so I think it's important to have a conversation, a broader conversation with a broader base of people, because I do see that's going to be a problem. it's a problem for me. Second, I think that there is a distinct difference between some historic designation and historic districts, right? The implications are vastly different, right? So you can have a place or a block or something that's designated as a historic district, but when we're talking about we're going to make a whole entire area from 155 to 200, as a national state, that's a totally different conversation. So I get that you're saying that there's going to be, there are all these other designations and resources within that same possibly Dominican historical district. But those are different, right? And then I personally, for me, in order for me to support this, I feel that it needs to be a part of another conversation, which was the proposal to rename this area and the other area. And I don't feel trust to move forward in support of something when we have not had that conversation. I do not know why we have not. Community District 9 had that conversation, and I was on that call. You were presentation was great. I was there the whole thing for the whole time. But we in District 12, we have not had that conversation, and I am not prepared to. Those things for me are a package deal. So in order for me to feel like I would want to have any sort of opinion about this whatsoever, that other conversation for me needs to be had, and it needs to be had at deliberate speed, as we say. And because it has not happened, and it's been requested for months and months, and it's just not acceptable to me. And I don't know why we haven't had that conversation, but I think a community that will help you, first of all, in this, to have that conversation, so that people can be educated, people can understand what is happening, why it's happening, why you feel this is needed. Because there are a lot of things going on. I don't know if you know, because part of my last comment, Wayne, I promise, because I see his brow was starting to furrow. Okay.
I want to give her a chance to respond.
I know, but I just and then in this community, the reason why I say that conversation is important, I think that there are layers of things going on. There's a lot of dissension and division in this community based on race and ethnicity. I wrote about that when I first applied to the community board. They asked us on the application, what are 3 things that you would like to tackle? And I said, the division, the ethnic and racial division that I witnessed from the moment I stepped foot in Washington Heights 17 years ago. And it hasn't stopped. In fact, it's gotten worse. And so I think that there are conversations that need to be had about how we treat each other, how we treat others, how we, and that need to be had in this conversation. There are some very nasty, ugly things said to people outside of the Dominican community, and even on the other side. Vice versa, right? There are things that are happening that are not healthy and that I need to be a part of this conversation. Those are my comments. I would like to have you respond to how you determine this length of this map. And I do not agree with that. And also just anything else that I've mentioned. But I don't personally, as a committee member, I speak for myself. There are other committee members that might feel differently. Will not move forward until that other conversation is held in our community district, as has been requested for months.
There are many things that you say that I actually don't understand, to be quite frank with you. In terms of coming to Community Board 12 to present this, I was invited and I came when I was invited. In terms of speaking about this with the outside community, I cannot do that. If I want my application to move forward, I cannot do that, right? So all of the people who wanted to hear about this
process, they have from outside. They have to wait until I am giving the green light by the institution that is reviewing this thing. In terms of the ethnic and racial divisions that you alluded to, we found it here. This is something that I found in this country when I came. This is something that Dominicans found here when they came. This is one answer that I had to give you. So not something that we invented or that we created. If this is with regards to that history, right? In relationship to the size, I actually was offended the first time that I heard that, because what I heard was, you could ask Ramona for this piece, but not for that piece, because who are you at the end of the day, you Dominican people, to ask for that piece? This is what you can ask for. The map, the logic of the map, and it's in writing, and I will send it to you. The logic of the map is the following. We counted the number of visible, concrete, tangible things that are Dominican to create the map. That's what we did. When you walk this place now, I don't know, 20 years from now, when you walk this area, this is what you are going to find. Dominican things bombarding you from left to right, from north to south. That's the rationale behind the map. It's not the historical memory of the Ellis Island people. I wish I can grab that, right? It's not the historical memory of the Malagon sisters, who were the first people of Dominican ancestry and one of the first Latino people to come to a national program in the US, right? The Sullivan Show. It's not that we cannot grab, though we have the video. It is the other stuff that you will find there that will, that is impossible for you to avoid. It is impossible for you not to see. So that is the logic behind the boundaries of the map. Before I heard that we were taking a piece of Harlem, we follow the definition of actually of city planning in Washington Heights, according to city planning. And I don't know whether they had changed that within the last year or so. Begins in Washington Heights. There's no, begins on 155th. There's no, nothing else, according to city planning. It's that's the boundaries there. But if you think that there are other boundaries with the 155th that we should look at, we will definitely look at it again to make sure that we are not speaking about another neighborhood. That's one thing. Even though that piece of land that you might be talking about is packed with Dominican people from north to south, we will leave it alone, right? Not to create any animosity with other groups. And plus, there's so much space where we are that it wouldn't hurt if we have to move, right? The boundaries. Regarding the Black community, that it's a little bit more complicated for me, because it's, you know, what I hear is the Dominican people that are Black. So what do we do with them? You know, if the question is that, that is a little bit more complicated. And I would not know how to answer that, right? Because of course you see us, and there's not much we can say about blackness, right? You see me here, right? And there was something else that I don't know whether there was something else that I'm missing.
Wayne, I because I'm not going to have another opportunity. So I just want to clarify what I'm talking about.
Yeah, actually, let me clarify for a second as well.
Can I clarify in my own voice? Just
well, I wanted to clarify something about a meeting.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so Dr. Hernandez, the meeting that we're talking about is a meeting that the chair of Community Board 12 is supposed to be or has been scheduling with Congressman Espaillat's office since the fall of last year. And it's in follow-up to the meeting that CB9 scheduled, with his office to talk about his proposal to initially rename, and that's what it physically said, to rename Washington Heights, Harlem, and Inwood. And it was subsequently changed so that it's focused now on the historic district. And your proposal is kind of, got lumped and tied into that. But the meeting that, we've asked for and have not yet had is the meeting with the congressman's office, which our board chair has responsibility for scheduling. At one point, it was suggested that land use do it. I had no problem doing it, but then it was decided that the chair would do that. I pointed out that you approached land use in October to do this presentation, so it's perfectly appropriate for us to invite you back to talk about, the proposal. What our chair is doing with the congressman, I cannot say.
Okay. Apologies, Vivian.
Tanya.
Yeah, Tanya. Apologies. I didn't know and I'm hoping that this board sees that there are multiple proposals out there for doing things in Washington Heights, right? And this is one proposal, and it's not that or that other or whatever it is. This is very specific. What we do in the Dominican Studies Institute is very transparent. It's very clear. It's public. This is the public university. We don't have the luxury of some private universities that they do things to us, and then we don't know. We know afterwards when they have already said what they have to say. That's not the case of the Dominican Studies Institute. We had done everything that we do. We did in the open, and we did as much as we can, the understanding and the views of the community. And so I didn't know that. Yeah.
No. And thank you. Like I said, yes. So that's what I was referring to, is that their conversation had been had with Community Board 9.
Okay.
I personally and others have asked for this conversation to be had in District 12. For some reason, it has not happened. And that is not acceptable to me. Okay. So we got to be careful, because when we start saying things like, because someone opposes something, we're opposing Dominicans or Dominican culture. No one is saying, and no one said, because I'm saying that 155th in that area that it's important to understand why people would feel that way, that people are saying something negative about Dominican culture or Dominican people. That happens a lot around here. Any criticism, we can't have a nuanced conversation, because it immediately turns into this us against them sort of argument. And I don't want to go down that road. I'm not interested, because first of all, that is not my thing. That is not what I'm doing. And so what I am saying is that even last year in February, we put together, and include Wayne and Steve and others on this committee, put some wonderful additions to that statement on Black History Month. And it included areas around 155th. Okay, and all of the contributions. They had a lot of knowledge that I didn't have, right? To make a beautiful statement. After much fight, we were finally able to get it out. And I say that because it was disgusting that we had to fight to get it out. Okay. And that made no sense to me. And so, and this is something that was alluded to in other settings by community members who felt appalled by the fight to get that statement out. But anyway, there is a lot of history in that area, right? And we can't discount that. And that's what I'm saying, is how we go into things. If we go into things, including folks in that conversation, instead of, I think you will have a better outcome, and so there is a lot of Black history in that area. Part of some of which was captured in our official board statement that was put out last February. Okay. And so we need to think about these things and be cognizant of these things. And that is part of the mistrust and the issue of this whole thing. Right. And yes, I do feel there is, and no one's saying that. I do understand. I'm very, very, I have a lot of understanding about intersectionality. A Black woman coined that phrase, Kimberly Crenshaw. So we understand there's intersectionality between being Black and also being Dominican or being Mexican or whatever, that those things will sometimes intersect, right? So I get that. And people who claim it right here. And there are people who don't claim it, right? There's a lot of division. There's a lot of issues. And I am not going to discount those issues. And I'm trying to explain is that a lot of that stuff comes to the surface when these things come up. And it's not about, oh, we hate these people, or it turns into that, and then we can't have an actual conversation because no one wants to be accused of the R word. Okay? People will just shrink back. Oh my God, now I'm being accused of being a racist. I can't have this conversation. So we can't go there. Okay. So what I'm saying is that this is a reality. This is a real thing. I have personally experienced this in the 17 years that I've been here. It is real. And I will say that I have a mistrust because of how that other thing was handled in terms of renaming. Someone sent it to me and said, have you seen? I didn't even know it existed. Someone sent it to me and I was blindsided by that. Okay. And so these two things must be, unfortunately, yes, your thing is a part of this, but those things to me are going to go together, because I don't know how this could be used to further that agenda of renaming. I don't know. Yeah. Who knows?
True. So Tanya, I see three other.
All right. Thank you. But
I heard, two things, one from Tanya and one from Dr. Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez, the interesting thing is city government's definition of neighborhoods and neighborhood residents' definition of neighborhoods don't always reconcile. There's some people who were on CB12 with me who still live in the neighborhood for whom Washington Heights actually does not begin at 155th Street. From their experience, and they are somewhere between my generation and my parents' generation, to them, West Harlem, Hamilton Heights came all the way up to the beginning of Presbyterian Hospital. So it came up to 165th Street. And Washington Heights was north of the hospital. And a number of people, when you talk about where they live, they talk about being north or south of the hospital. If you look at LPC and city planning, they have kind of the Sugar Hill Historic District ending at 145th Street. And, folks, once again, in my parents' generation, Sugar Hill, comes all the way up to the Jamel Mansion area and north. And folks who grew up there, interesting, said they never considered that neighborhood to be Harlem. They never considered it to be Washington Heights. They considered it to be Sugar Hill. And part of what Tanya is saying is, while it's fine for historic districts to overlap, we should be careful that we're not erasing any identities. Because, Sugar Hill means something, to people who love jazz. It means something to the Black community. It means something in the development of the city of New York. My understanding is it was Irish immigrants who gave Sugar Hill the name Sugar Hill, because, quote unquote, Negroes with sugar, meaning they had more money, were the ones who lived up the hill. So, so there's the definition of neighborhood. And what's interesting is Little Italy and Chinatown, while today that's a single historic district, there were fights because Canal Street, I think, was the dividing line. And when Chinatown started to expand north into Little Italy, that was a problem. So it's interesting now that that problem was resolved in having a historic district that recognizes both, but it in its title recognizes both, not one or the other. And something that we can't have a conversation on now, but it's a wonderful conversation, is this whole notion of not just race and ethnicity, but as Tanya said, what people claim. And I remember at a forum at the Schomburg, Dr. Martha Moreno Vega, when someone asked her more or less, how does she identify? She says, if I run into the police on the street, they don't know I have a PhD. They don't know my parents are from Puerto Rico. They don't know that I was the founding director of El Museum del Barrio. They don't know that I formed my own nonprofit. They do know that I'm Black. So she's all of those things, and she has no problem telling you she's all of those things. Some people who look like me or darker would have a problem saying that they are Black. They will say they're Cuban. They will say that they're Dominican. They'll say they're Puerto Rican, but they will not say they are Black. And so there are some who claim everything they are, and there's some who do not.
I think that we never thought, and I still don't think, that by claiming Dominicanness in certain areas, we are erasing others. I never thought that, right? And so much so that, you know, when we describe to you that there are resources in this area, that they are what they are, and they will never lose that character and that identity, no matter how many times we want to claim that place to be whatever else. They are what they are, and they will be that. So, but the understanding that by claiming a piece of space, Dominicans, that is erasing others, that's the hard one. That's a real hard one.
I think it's a matter of how things are presented, because it can be presented in a way that it's understood that it's additive, and it can be presented in a way that people don't understand how it impacts it.
If presentation means changing the name of Dominican for something else.
No, I mean how it's discussed. That's what I mean by how it's presented, how it's discussed. But anyway, I'm taking up too much time. Sally, Vivian, Jim, and Steve. So Sally.
I guess, I don't know if I'm on mute still.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. I guess I had the same question that Tanya raised, which is how does this relate to the Congressman's resolution regarding the renaming of Washington Heights and Inwood? And I guess Harlem is out of that proposal now. I note that this touches on Inwood, but does not include Inwood. So I was a little curious about that. And then I guess just a general question. I understand what you said about, you know, why it does cover this huge expanse of land because there are specific places within it that define it. But my question is, how typical is it for a historic district to span this many blocks?
Actually, there are historic districts. I think I have a number. That's the later research that we are doing, trying to find out how many Latino historic districts we have in the nation. And I'm not there yet, and but I have some data I think here.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in how typical it is in New York State.
I don't know about New York State, but there are historic districts that are really very large. And I think the largest one, it's in Georgia, Savannah, that it's varies, I think, an enormous amount of miles of a particular city. So yes, they are. And this is, in order for you to have a historic district, you either have to have, you have to have some communality, whether it's whether you're thinking about architecture, so the buildings that you are asking for that designation, they are the same time, or something else. In this case, it's a culture that we are appealing to, that we are claiming to. It's a history that we are claiming to, and that culture, that history goes in those blocks that we had designed.
So it is also following the definition of what is a historic district. How do you define that? Whether you go for the physical, which is the building structure, or whether you go for the culture. And then there was someone actually, or I don't know how many people have come to us and said, well, why did you cut this in 200 and didn't continue? Because if actually if you go to on the upper west side, you're gonna find Dominican markers up to 230, right? And the answer to those people was, yes, they are Dominican markers, you're right, but not as many, as abundant as in the other places. And we have to draw the lines, right? So that is, this is why the length, which actually is not that lengthy as you compare to other historic districts.
And then one other question, and probably not necessarily related to this project, but other research that you might have ongoing. Has anyone updated these maps to reflect the 2020 census? So do we know what's going on with population shifts as a result of that census?
I can assure you for a fact, that the Dominican population has not diminished in the country or the city. Actually, it grew. It's one of the population that has seen a lovely, nice increase.
Yeah. No, I was more concerned about whether there's been any shift to other neighborhoods in New York City out of.
Oh, yes. The Dominican population now surpass every population that you can think of in the Bronx. Yeah. It is expanding nicely. And the Bronx is, wow, it is very, very, the term is used in demography, aggressive popular growth. So it's, yeah, it is an aggressive growth. Yes. All the other boroughs, but that is simply unseen.
Yeah, my concern, I guess, especially in Enwood, is to what extent there's been displacement.
Well, but to some extent, Sally, that's not the focus or the genesis of.
No, I understand that. That's why I said it was a separate issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I will.
Vivian.
I'll shut up now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Vivian, you're muted.
Hi, I grew up hearing, my mother's first cousin was the founding person of Sosua, the Jewish colony in the Dominican Republic. So I actually grew up hearing about the Dominican Republic. So it's not as if in any way that I'm anti-Dominican, but I will say, since there is a connection, back to what Tanya said in the meeting, that around the time that there was the meeting at Community Board 9, suddenly all the references in my immediate neighborhood around 157th Street that were coming up as the little Dominican Republic, like when I looked at the weather or other aspects, disappeared. But interesting enough, they're back again. It's like when nobody was looking, they've crept in. I looked at the weather the other day, and I live in the little Dominican Republic. And I know it's not you from the scholarly point of view, but you obviously are connected to some degree to Dominican recognition. And I would normally, I'm all about history and recognition, but also I can't support this district because I feel like it's already being put on to me without even anybody voting on it by what I see on Google Maps and everything else.
Jim.
First, I would like to compliment everyone, particularly Tanya and Wayne and Dr. Hernandez, for the sensitive way you were handling what are very delicate issues. And I think you know, as Tanya implies, at some point we will need to talk about the delicate issues, but we have to get to that point. And so again, you are all to be complimented on your sensitivity. I was very impressed by that and very heartened by that, because we all live in the same neighborhood and we all have to work together, because that's the only way we're gonna not just survive, but thrive. Anyway, so thank you. I believe I understood what Dr. Hernandez said, but I'm going to give you a hypothetical. As you may be aware, PS 132 at 182nd Street, which I attended, and which is now named after Juan Pablo Duarte, was also attended by the great baseball player Lou Gehrig. And in fact, I was involved in the 4th grade in creating this big mural. I mean, all they allowed me to do was paint green where the grass was. I'm not very talented. But now let me give you this hypothetical. And based upon something you said on you know, what the law says. And if you know, I understand you correctly, then I think that that's a very good thing. Let's say hypothetically, Lou Gehrig comes back and he turns this school, aside from the fact that he's there, he turns it into a school that emphasizes not just baseball, but also medicine, because as we all know, he had ALS. So he does this miracle and then he disappears. And now we have this wonderful, and in fact, it turns out the school has an old building and a new building. The new building was built in 1915. The old building was built in 1905. So one building could be the baseball school and the other building could be the school where they learn the science. Now, we had this miraculous thing happen, okay? We want to make this a historic district because of the miracle of Lou Gehrig. Based upon what you said, there's no exclusivity to the district that you're proposing, and we could make this new historic thing right in the middle of the district. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It is. You put
Right,
your,
and again, that's very important, because one of the things you're trying to stress is that it's not exclusive.
no,
Because as you well know, and it probably came, you know, it occurred, you saw it in your research, there's been a parade of various ethnic groups, not just the Germans like Lou Gehrig, but the German Jews like my family, who came in response to, well, actually my parents came in response to the economic conditions in Germany. But the point is, there were Italians, there were Asians, and
Irish.
and Irish, and in fact, near PS 189, there was a very, very large Armenian community. There's still an Armenian church at 187th Street between St. Nicholas Avenue and Audubon Avenue. It's on the south side of the street. The important thing is that, you know, there is this lack of exclusivity. So someone could make an Armenian district or whatever. And in fact, if that were to happen, then this would be the polyglot of districts that its history actually exhibits. So that could be, and again, no one has any problem with this. Now, I think, unfortunately, our representative had an early idea that was terrible, and people got very upset. And unfortunately, your project, which has nothing to do with this particular thing that Adriano originally proposed, and he no longer does, people are conflating the two, and they really have nothing to do with one another. And you know, again, without going into it, the original proposal that the congressman came up with was, I think, offensive to a lot of people. He mustn't have been thinking, or what, I don't know. But the thing is that this is not your, you know, that's not what you're doing, and what you're doing is inherently not exclusive. And you know, like you said, and it is important. I agree that the Dominican heritage and the heritage of all these other groups, if that's what the groups want to do or whatever, they all be, put in a context so that the history stays. So, that there may be a, sign on Wayne's building 50 years from now that the great planner Wayne Benjamin lived there and he saved Washington Heights from dragons, or whatever he did. So again, I think, and so I am, reassured. And again, the good faith, which I think we all worked on, and I compliment Wayne and Tanya and all of it. I try my best too, that we showed tonight is a model for what we have not seen occasionally at our general meetings or we are, people want, this is the way people want things to go. And we are showing right now tonight by our behavior that they can certainly go that way and we can all work together. Thank all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Actually, thank you, sir, for opening that door. Yes, this kinds of denomination opens a door for other people to come and claim a specific aspects that have perhaps not been noticed before in the same place. It allows for multiplicity of creating landmarks and creating, the landmark, some people wanted to keep away from that because, it's difficult to touch those places later, but historic places, that opened the door for us to create historic places within historic districts more and bring more visibility to the people that had passed through Washington Heights and the people that contribute to Washington Heights. This only adds to what we have, thinking about, the kinds of adding that we have done, contributions that we have done. Now we know that before the English and before the Dutch in New York City, now we know that we have a person of color. Now we know that that person was Latino. Now we know that that person was an immigrant, as compared to two groups of people that came to take away from the people that originally owned this land. We also have one other person that was neither of that, and that was Juan Rodriguez. And so we added to the conversation, and we added a good piece to the conversation, a good history, right, to the conversation. The same thing happens when we, disclose that Esteban Otesi happened to be Dominicano, a man that was part of the Tuskegee, the first group of African-American or Black, actually, pilots in World War II that work as part of World War II. There we have a Dominican person, and rather than taking away from the history of the Tuskegee, that it's so important to us, to all people in this country, we added another layer to that. And he's being recognized for that in his town where he was born, but he was also recognized for standing up to segregation in the army before the 60s. So it is this uncovering these pieces of the good contributions that a people make. I think it only help us, going back to what Tanya and the rest of the colleagues were saying, to try to deal with and undermine as much as we can the divisions that we have among us that are here for being here for centuries. So thank you. That opens that door for that. If he comes back, or not, he doesn't have to come back. If a group decides to honor that legacy, or Lugran in that place. Do the research, do the application, and we have one more item in Washington Heights that we can utilize to attract visitors and be proud of that neighborhood.
Steve.
I have a comment and I guess a couple of questions. My first comment is with respect to the discussion earlier as to where Washington Heights begins, or where people perceived it to begin. I can remember doing research, and I think Vivian is aware of this. We've seen materials going back to the early 1900s that defined Washington Heights as going all the way down to 135th Street. And that City College was once considered part of Washington Heights. So the boundary line seems to change as time goes on. But let me, that's neither here nor there. I'm surprised to hear that SHPO has an interest in preserving both the exterior and the interior of buildings. I didn't think that that they exerted that kind of influence. I thought the city was much stricter in that regard, and basically the city is usually only interested in the exterior of buildings. So let me ask,
Steve, you remember the public school 145th Street, 186?
Sure.
So for that project got the state historic tax credits. And to get that, it's not just the outside, they needed to preserve X% of the interior of the building to qualify. Now, if there was a city historic credit, which doesn't really exist, Landmarks would have been interested in just the outside, but to get the state grant through SHPO, and if you've walked through the building, there are elements of like the old stairs, which are much too large for residential, that they kept. There's part of the auditorium. There's a part of what used to be the principal's office, which is now community space. All of that was kept to have enough interior space left to qualify for SHPO's regs.
But if the building owner wants to make some alterations to the interior of the building, do they have to go to SHPO to get a sign off?
Well, if the building owner wants to make alterations for a landmark, they have to go to LPC, but LPC simply will issue a certificate of no impact.
Well,
I'm not as familiar with SHPO, but the point is they do look at it, is my point.
But let me ask Dr. Hernandez, would every building within the historic district fall under this particular jurisdiction of SHPO, or just the buildings that you're marking and highlighting as having a Dominican significance?
Only the buildings that we are marking. That's one thing. Indeed, but the second thing is that they are not identified as landmarks. So while you cannot touch the outside, I don't know anything about inside. It's the landmark status. That's the complication. But the historic site or the historic district, that's a different ballgame. You can touch that as far as I know. It's the landmark status, and you do have historic districts with landmarks in that historic district. And those landmarks cannot, it's complicated.
Okay, but what you're doing is
Historic.
It's just the historic district.
No landmarks. No landmarks. We have, as a community, you have tons of opportunities to create landmarks. Some people will advise you that way.
But in terms of how people should respond to your proposal as to how it, especially let's say the building owners, then they should not be fearful that they're going to have to get any prior approvals from SHPO if they want to.
I think we need to have someone from SHPO or state parks, which is SHPO, confirm that there's someone in the office who does this at the state level for a state authority. And what they shared with me is if you create a district, then everything in the district becomes subject to review. So, but they also pointed out that the cultural difference may be different. So we need to get some clarification from the agency having jurisdiction on what's what.
Yeah, we definitely need to, because it certainly seems like an overreach to say that every single building is going to have to go through some review at SHPO. But I would appreciate the opportunity to delve deeper into exactly which buildings are being marked and are being highlighted in your proposal. So when you send us the map, will we be able to do the interactive use the interactive feature to look at each of those buildings?
Right, but it's still those buildings right, that you will be able to connect to interactively are not proposed to be landmarked at all.
No, I understand, but they are the basis of your proposal.
They are on the basis of the proposal, and they will be they are within the historic district.
Right, yeah,
So please, I want no confusion here. It's a historic district.
Right.
We are not speaking about landmarks whatsoever.
But we would certainly get a much better understanding of the proposal if we saw the nuts and bolts of which buildings are being marked and are being highlighted, and what and
the buildings are highlighted. Yes, sir. The map, it's and this is in the open. This is in the open. This is something that is not even owned by the the university. This is something that is in the public domain, the site actually. So yes, you will be able to see all the buildings, all the places actually that we are highlighting as a cultural contribution, as a historical contribution. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point, but the building that you live in, Steve, the building that Vivian lives in, the building that I live in, are not landmarked per se, but they are in a historic district. And therefore, I'm going through this now, every capital project has to be reviewed by landmarks. Now, once again, what Dr. Hernandez is talking about is SHPO, which is a state district. But my point is, before we come to any conclusions on how people should or should not react, we need to get clarification from someone at SHPO or state parks that understands their program on how it compares or contrasts to LPC's historic districts. Because if an LPC historic district, once the district is established, the buildings within it are subject to the same level of review as if they were individual landmarks.
So I certainly understand that, but I was always under the impression that the city procedure was much tighter than the state's. And
the city procedure gives you more protection, yes.
Well, it gives the buildings landmark status more protection, yes. Are you saying? Did I understand you to say that the map is already available, that we can see it on a website?
You actually go to Google and say Dominican Historic District. And that map, proposed Dominican Historic District, I think it is, and that map will show up, and it will tell you that this is part of the proposed historic district.
If you could send that link to Ebenezer or myself, I could share it with the committee.
Yes,
thank you.
we will send it.
That would be extremely useful.
If I can just add one thing, on the SHPO website, we reviewed it rigorously, I would say, and it says that the only buildings that would be prevented from making from essentially doing what they want in terms of renovations would be those who are receiving state funding.
All right, that makes sense.
That information is public, so you can probably send the link to them as well.
And I'm sure
that's one thing. We don't have the benefit of speaking to people directly at Summer Youth because of your position. We have to go by what is written and it's available to the public. So whatever we use and whatever it's available to everyone. And I think it's that's a good thing.
Yeah, and we
certainly
have the ability through either directly or through our elected officials to get a contact with SHPO to get clarification of what we need.
Wayne, so is he saying schools that get state funding would be affected? And then there's some
I think it's
organizations.
projects. I think it's projects. So the project I was talking to Steve about, that was a renovation project that actually got funding and credits through the state. And so if you're doing a project and you're getting state funding, or if you're doing an alteration to your building and you're getting state funding, if you're going to Sony May or something like that, that probably would mean that you would need to comply. If you're going to Citibank and you're not getting any state money, you may not have gone, but I still think you need to submit, like with landmarks, an application, and SHPO would give you the equivalent of a certificate of no impact, but that's what I want to have clarified from someone who knows for sure. Interestingly enough, there was an email that came today, I think it was to Ebenezer and myself, of 3 applications in this Audubon Park Historic District. When you click on the PDF, I think there's 780 Riverside Drive, they're doing something, and a certificate of no impact. They're doing some alteration. I mean, if you're changing your boiler, I mean, for example, you need to do that, but it has no impact on the landmark aspect of the building. But my point is, you still have to file with landmarks to say that you're doing something, and they come back and say this has no impact on the building's landmark status.
Yeah, but I just can't believe that every building.
We will find out. Whether you believe it or not, we will find out.
Gonna have to go through this process.
I mean, as I understand it, the Upper West Side and Greenwich Village historic districts are geographically rather large. Every building in those historic districts.
But those are New York City historic districts.
Exactly. So
that's not what she's proposing.
Steve, we're being redundant. I'm saying we will check and we will get verification on what SHPO's requirements are. What Dr. Hernandez is saying is fine. And I'm saying what I was told by someone who does this for a living is slightly different. So we'll get confirmation.
It's a couple of things. I like to see whether the young researchers that are here have something to add before we but I'm hoping that whatever you find out, it's also written so that everybody have access to that. I mean, this is the difference between living in a democratic country and living in another place where some people get information and some others don't. We are using information that is available to the public. That's extremely important to us.
Well, I mean, this the same way that we ask LPC, you know, what happens here, there, and they send us back an email. You know, if we email SHPO and say what happens here, we'll get it. I mean, that's something I think, you know, we're pretty good about sharing information. I'm told I email people like all hours of the day and night. So don't be worried about that. You'll get my emails. But I mean, going back to your point, are there any sort of closing comments from members of your team now that we're at 9:35?
Mariela, Waldemar, these are the young generations of researchers at the Institute. They are one that will be taking over all over when we're not here. So those of us that are at my age, do you have something to add? Did I forget something? There's something important that you want to emphasize?
For me, no, Dr. Hernandez.
For me, just the link to the website. Sorry, I'm not able to send it through the Q&A.
No, you can just email it to someone and we'll get it, you know.
Okay, no problem.
It doesn't have to be right now.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I would like to say to the, you know, to the young researchers who are attending a college that I graduated in 1980, that, you know, I remember when I was in graduate school, one of my professors said that if you can, you know, sort of tolerate or sustain sort of the level of sort of an intense conversation, the result of that will actually be better than if you stay away from, you know, having the conversation. And that's not exactly the way he was putting it, but this was in planning school. And, you're talking about things of, neighborhood and economic whatever, and sometimes it can get a little tense. And he said, rather than sort of backing away from that, sort of explore, what it is that's being discussed, because what the outcome of that will probably be more informative than, backing away from having the conversation. And so I just want to echo what, Jim Berlin said is, I think we've shared our opinions this evening, but I think we've done it in a way that allowed us to have a conversation, not an argument.
Thank you.
And I see a hand from our council member, and you can have the closing comments.
Well, I just wanted to thank Dr. Hernandez and the researchers for putting together something that I think was well presented, well researched, and professional. And I agree with all of you here. I was listening more than commenting that there are tough conversations we must have. But I always say, and I maintain that our struggles unite us more than our differences divide us. And I'm looking forward to having those conversations in earnest in our community. And I thank you, Dr. Hernandez, for your decades of dedication to the generations of our community. So thank you. And thank you, Wayne, for allowing the opportunity.
And I thank you for staying with us for this entire duration.
No problem. I turned off the camera at some points because my daughter's running around here past bedtime.
Well, we were following Sally around as she was smoking in her house, so it's okay. Is there any old business or new business?
Under old business, has there been any further word about the Cumming Street project?
We discussed earlier in the meeting that there's another BSA hearing coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, the next BSA hearing, Steve, is on March 28th. So everyone will be back.
All right. So presumably they're still in the process of trying to respond to BSA's comments?
Yeah, the developers were not there at the first hearing. They bowed out at the last minute. They wanted an adjournment, and the BSA did not give them the adjournment. So there's a lot of testimony, but there's nothing from the developer.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry that I have to let you go. I have to go. Sorry.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for participating in this, conversation. And we look forward to,
thank you.
Follow-up information and more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Old, new?
Can I just ask a question, Wayne? Given that
You can certainly ask, yes.
okay, is there nothing we can do about the 4650, the fresh application, given that it was just used by the developer as a way to get the height?
I have no idea. My sense of the answer is no, because as was pointed out to us, last month, the way the program is structured, there are certain requirements, and if the application meets the requirements, then the chair has, very little latitude. And it's kind of like the discussion we were having a couple months ago, the difference between, the building department and zoning.
Right.
The building department, there's a building code. If your plans, satisfy code, if it's, structurally safe, if it's got the right means of egress, the system, whatever, the fact that you think the building is the ugliest building ever designed
Doesn't matter.
isn't really the building department's concern. They need to approve the application. And a few years ago, there was some politics being played with a project because it was, I don't know if it was, the developer was, friendly with the governor, and as one of the, not the current governor, I mean, it was like, so the mayor was having the building department do whatever. And at some point, went to court, and it was like, listen, this application meets the code, and what's going on here has nothing to do with, and it's not within your jurisdiction to deny the permit because of political back and forth. So that's one of the reasons why I suggest we need to look at the issue of the guidelines for the FRESH program and suggest, with Carmen De La Rosa's assistance, that they be updated to include not just, a test to prevent oversaturation of supermarkets built using the program, but also to test the availability of, similar supermarkets within the same half-mile radius to determine if there's a need, and if so, the square footage, because it could be that, yes, there's a need, but you don't need 15,000 square feet. Maybe you only need half of that.
Right. I just wondered if there was maybe something anywhere in the preservation stuff, since it is a landmarked park, that we could.
Yeah, but the site isn't in it.
Yeah, okay.
And, but the arguments that were made in terms of view corridors and whatever are still valid. And I suppose that elected officials can continue to make, lots of noise and see if, since actually we now have a new chair of city planning, maybe the new chair will override what the old chair did, but we'll see.
Worth an appeal.
Maybe that's a conversation now with the mayor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Under new business?
Is there a new business item?
Yeah, I don't know, a week or two ago, maybe I forwarded to you an article, I think it was from Patch, about the fact that some people had purchased the site at Bennett Avenue and the Fort Tryon Jewish Center site with the big rock on Bennett and 184th Street. And
The Rudy site, yes.
yeah, Thompson, Rutherford Thompson's. So I thought maybe we should try to reach out to them and ask them, try to discern what their plans are, whether they intend to do what he had in mind, a 23-story complex.
If someone has contact information for the new owners, we could certainly do that. I don't think there was contact information in the materials provided. Maybe the office can, look into that.
Yeah, well, could you ask them to do that?
We can certainly pass along, although Ebenezer is on the line. But, I could, forward that and see if they can find out or obtain, information on who the owner is, or at least who the owner's rep is.
Or wouldn't the sales record be registered with the Department of Finance or some city agency?
Yes, but that will not necessarily give you contact information for the person. If for example, the new owner is the Acme, Acme Washington Heights LLC, that's the name of it, and it's filed wherever, but it won't necessarily give you Steve Simon's phone number and email address. If that's the contact person, it will give you kind of the legal owner and the legal owner's, filing address, which may be, Delaware. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't, it may give you the number of like the attorney who filed the paper. So my point is, we can put it in, we can ask, office staff to see what they can find out. Maybe the borough president's office has some more information, but we can have them follow up and see what they can find.
All right, thank you.
Not a problem. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
By Vivian. It's 9:45. Hearing, unless there are any objections, we are adjourned. And this was for land use, a long meeting. For some other committees, not so. But when land use has long meetings, we typically also have rather interesting conversations. So good night, all.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.